Thank you, Madam Chairwoman, and thank you, Eleanor Holmes Norton, for your implacable support for righting a wrong. This issue today is really about democratic unfinished business. It's not really about so much of what has been discussed. My friend Jody Heiss criticizes DC as not being viable because it doesn't have car dealerships. Not true, by the way, it does. And it doesn't have a landfill. So now we're going to have a new test for statehood. Do you have a landfill? The absurdity of the arguments being propounded on the other side of the aisle are all subterfuge. And I'm grateful for our last questioner on the Republican side, my friend Ms. Fox, for actually letting the cat out of the bag. This is about race and partisanship and affiliation. She asked a series of questions of the mayor of the District of Columbia that I think are profoundly inappropriate to characterize how people might vote were they granted the right of statehood to have two senators, and what kinds of particular philosophical attitudes those two senators might have. We have never made partisanship a condition of statehood. And I might add, the danger of that assumption is that things change. In 1959, when Alaska and Hawaii were paired for statehood, creating the 49th and 50th state, Alaska was assumed to be a Democratic state, and Hawaii was assumed to be a Republican state. And indeed, initially, that's how they performed. Today, nobody would think that way. Hawaii is clearly a strong Democratic state, and Alaska is clearly a strong Republican state. Assumptions are dangerous. Behavior changes. We can't make decisions on that basis. Ms. Schwartz, I want to make sure I understood your answer to Ms. Norton. The admissions clause in the Constitution grants near absolute power to the Congress in terms of admitting a new state into the Union. Is that not correct?
That is correct.
Are there conditions? Is the conditionality in the admissions clause?
Yes, the conditions are that no new state can be formed within the jurisdiction of another state, nor by joining two states together or parts of states together without the consent of the legislatures of those states.
Right. So Mr. Comer's question to somebody about how about we split up California would actually be in violation of the very provision without the consent of Californians you just cited.
Yes, California's consent would be required.
And Congress, as somebody asked you earlier about Ohio, the Northwest Territory at the time, in fact, was created by the session, the voluntary session of a number of states, including my own, Virginia, out of which Ohio was fashioned. Do you recall that?
Yes.
Yes. And when Texas was admitted, which was very controversial, took a while. But when Texas was finally admitted to the Union, Congress insisted on boundary changes that actually added territory to what is now New Mexico and took it away from Texas. Do you recall that?
I am not familiar with the specifics of the boundaries of Texas at the time of statehood, unfortunately.
Trust me on that. In other words, Congress exercised broad power not only to admit a state, but to decide on the physical configuration of that state. Let me just say, Madam Chairwoman, I grieve at what's happened to the party of Lincoln, the party of emancipation, the party of 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendments. You have to look at what we're discussing in a context. And the context on the other side of the aisle, tragically, is about voter suppression. 200 bills have been introduced in 43 states since the election last November to restrict, repress, suppress the vote, the ability of people to vote early and with facility. In fact, in Mr. Heiss's home state of Georgia, we have seen some of the most repugnant bills since Jim Crow to do just that, restrict the vote. And I think we have to be looking at this issue of whether we continue to restrict the vote in DC in that context. We're either about empowerment and winning elections fairly and squarely by competing, or we're not. We are either the world's greatest democracy, or we cherry pick who enjoys the benefits and blessings of that democracy. This is a wrong based in race, based in very sordid history that is long overdue to be righted. Let's do the right thing. Let's stop arguing about false history. Let's stop the subterfuge, and let's empower the 712,000 fellow Americans to exercise their American right to make their choice any way they wish in a free election that empowers them as a state. I yield back.
The gentleman